Cramming can work tonight. That is exactly why it is convincing. At the end of a concentrated session, the material is warm, the cues are active, and one more repetition feels easy. The final question is answered correctly. The sequence can be repeated. You close the source with a reasonable sense that the work is complete. Then time changes the result. A week later, part of the sequence has disappeared. The argument is recognizable but hard to reconstruct. The natural conclusion is that the first session was too short or unsuccessful. Often the more useful conclusion is simpler. One successful encounter was asked to carry knowledge farther than one encounter usually can. Cepeda and colleagues published a large review and quantitative synthesis of distributed practice in 2006. It covered hundreds of assessments across many verbal recall experiments. Across that literature, spacing study events was generally associated with better delayed recall than concentrating them together. The scale matters, and so does the scope. These were primarily verbal recall tasks, not a direct trial of every complex skill an adult might learn. The research also does not produce one universal calendar. A 2008 study by Cepeda and colleagues examined the relation between the gap before restudy and the delay before the final test. The pattern was not a simple more is better line. The gap associated with stronger performance changed as the desired retention interval changed, and gaps could become too long. A later meta-analysis by Latimer, Payer, and Ramus found an advantage for spaced over massed retrieval, but no significant overall advantage for expanding schedules over uniform schedules. So the viral 13721 rule is not a scientific schedule for every learner and subject. The evidence supports a principle, not a magic sequence. If the knowledge must survive beyond the current session, bring it back after the original context has faded enough to make access meaningful. The free 7-day recall experiment is linked below. It offers one bounded way to observe a return, not a claim that 7 days is optimal for every learning goal. Use return, retrieve, reschedule. First, return after a real delay before the need becomes urgent. Choose a delay that creates some uncertainty without making successful access implausible. Second, retrieve before reopening the explanation. Produce the central idea and one condition, distinction, or step that later use will require. Then check and correct. Third, reschedule based on what happened. If the answer was accurate and useful, move the next return farther away. If it was partial, return sooner. If it was absent or confused, repair comprehension before scheduling another attempt. Imagine learning 3 terms for a client conversation in 2 weeks. On Monday, all 3 are clear. On Wednesday, before reopening the lesson, you state each meaning, use one term in a sentence, and explain how it differs from the closest alternative. 2 meanings return, but the usage condition for the third is vague. You repair that condition and choose another return several days later. The result controls the next step. A ritual calendar does not. Spacing describes when learning events occur. It does not decide what you do during them. A later reread creates a spaced exposure, but the page supplies the answer before you can observe what survived. Retrieval before rereading gives the return a useful structure. The return can also change form. Prose can become a question, a procedure can become a predicted next step, and a pair of definitions can become 2 cases that must be distinguished. Not every detail deserves a schedule. Some information can remain in a reference because later work will provide the reference. Some material is temporary. Natural use can also create spacing. A concept applied accurately every week may already return often enough. Deliberate returns are most useful before the first urgent use, for ideas that matter but appear rarely, and for distinctions whose errors would be expensive. Natural returns count when they require the knowledge that matters and provide accurate feedback. A later chapter can bring back an earlier principle. A recurring work task can provide distributed practice. A conversation can force an explanation in a new context. You do not need to duplicate these encounters with a separate schedule. Deliberate spacing fills the gaps that ordinary life will not provide soon enough or safely enough. A gap can be too short. Repeating a definition 30 seconds later may support initial formation, but it says little about access after the original context has faded. A gap can also be too long. If every meaningful route back has disappeared, the event becomes relearning from the beginning. Relearning is not worthless, but the current interval may have exceeded what the knowledge could support. The useful region lies between effortless continuation and total restart, and that region changes as knowledge grows. Keep the boundary. Spacing cannot rescue material that was never understood. It does not eliminate forgetting, guarantee transfer, or specify how a complex professional skill should be scheduled. Initial orientation may require concentrated time. Real skills may need repeated performance, current references, supervision, and feedback. Time itself is not the technique. The technique is the return across time, especially when it requires accurate retrieval and checking. For the complete system and its evidence boundaries, see the evidence-based learner. Do not judge durable learning only at the warm end of the original session. Return after time. Retrieve before rereading. Let the result, the importance of the material, and the real delay until use determine what happens next.